Bears today are some of nature's most feared and respected animals. Many cultures have stories about great and powerful bears that are deeply ingrained in native religions and mythologies. And in the areas they live, bears remain some of the largest and most intimidating animals in existence. Bears are also a much more diverse group of animals than you might think. The polar bear, the world's largest terrestrial carnivore, is one of the only animals that is known to actively hunt human beings, whilst the sun bear, not much bigger than a Labrador, is known to live primarily off of honey, insects, plants, and small animals. It should come as little surprise then that bears throughout prehistory were even more diverse than the ones alive today. Like many mammals, bears began their evolutionary life as very small creatures, who gradually adapted to grow massive into their omnivorous lifestyles. One of these prehistoric bears was a true monster. Arctodus, a genus of short-faced bear that lived across North America throughout the Pleistocene epoch. This is an animal that the very first Americans would have met and competed with for food and shelter. Today, we will be meeting this giant bear in all its glory, examining its lifestyle, appearance, diet, its significance to early humans, and its eventual extinction. Join us as we meet Arctodus, one of the very biggest prehistoric bears. The two species of Arctodus, Pristinus and Simus, were members of the Tremarctinae subfamily of bears, who are otherwise known as short-faced bears, on account of their blunt skulls and diminutive snouts. The only surviving member of this subfamily today is the Andean or spectacled bear, a vulnerable species that lives primarily across the Andes Mountains of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina. Arctodus simus was the larger of the two species, standing over 1.5 meters tall at the shoulders when walking on all fours. This bear would have shown off its immense size when stood up on its hind legs, however, and is estimated to have been able to reach a height of up to 3.5 meters tall when doing this. Even greater with its arms raised above its head, it could have attained a towering 4.3 meters. Arctodus simus is thought to have weighed around 625 kilograms when fully grown, but some specimens exceed this, weighing in at an estimated 950 kilograms. Such a bear would have been an awe-inspiring sight on the tundras and grasslands of ancient America, and this species may have been the largest carnivorous mammal, let alone bear, to ever live in North America. Arctodus pristinus was still massive, but slightly more modest. This bear was typically around the same size as a modern-day grizzly bear, but males of this species are thought to be roughly in line with the size of females of Arctodus simus. Weight estimations have put this bear at an average of around 140 kilograms, but some could exceed this greatly, weighing in at roughly 400 kilograms. Despite the name short-faced bear, Arctodus's face was proportionally a very similar length to bears of the Ursus genus. That's animals such as the grizzly bear and extinct cave bear of Europe. The name comes from the illusion caused by the deep broadness of the snout and the slightly shorter nasal bone found in the bear's skulls. This structure would have allowed the bears to boast excellent senses of smell, with enlarged olfactory systems which would have helped the animals detect food from far away. Aside from size, the dentition of these bears has been a key way for paleontologists to determine which Arctodus species they were studying. Arctodus pristinus's teeth were smaller and more widely spaced out across the mouth, whereas the larger Arctodus simus had teeth that were closely packed together with larger canines. Many artists' reconstructions of Arctodus depict the animal with proportionately very long legs in relation to the size of its body. But in reality, Arctodus's limbs were the same length as those seen in most bear species. In living species, the length of the limbs is typically obscured by the thick fur that keeps the animal warm. As Arctodus generally had a shorter torso than most of the Ursus bears, this too may have been an anatomical illusion. At the end of each of Arctodus's limbs was a colossal paw, much longer and thinner than any living bear. Arctodus trackways discovered in Oregon show that the bear had symmetrical paws, the front two of which were longer than the back two. Similar to modern pandas and other bears in the Tremarctinae subfamily, Arctodus possessed a false thumb on its forelimbs that would have helped it manipulate vegetation or potentially to assist in climbing trees. Arctodus is believed to have been an omnivore with a particular focus on plant matter. This has been determined from studies on how the animal would chew as well as the overall structure of its teeth. The wear and tear on known Arctodus teeth support this, indicating that the animal was eating many different types of food, but damage usually sustained from eating meat and colliding with bone was relatively small. Like many living bears, the diet of Arctodus was complex, and the bears were happy to consume anything from fruits and seeds to the meat of fish and terrestrial animals. It would seem that herbivory was a primary trait in these bears, and that meat would only be taken opportunistically, however. Arctodus was not thought to have been a commonly active predator due to its lack of agility, but individuals may have hunted when the need arose. Arctodus bite marks have been found on the bones of ground sloths and mastodons, but this is likely from when the bears were scavenging the meat of animals that had already died. Arctodus and its remains are closely associated with caves across North America, which may indicate that these bears took refuge inside them to hibernate across the colder winter months. Caves have been found with claw marks etched into the walls, which could only have been made by Arctodus, and some show evidence that the bears were constructing cubbing dens to raise their young. These bears are also known to have come into contact with the first peoples in the Americas. Some of the first Americans were the Clovis people, characterized by their crafted stone points and early passage into the continent via the now sunken land bridge of Beringia between Alaska and northeast Russia. One site, the earliest known interaction between Arctodus and Homo sapiens, at the Lubbock Lake landmark in Texas, seems to show Arctodus remains that were collected and butchered by early humans. These people came across the carcass of an Arctodus simus that had likely succumbed to natural causes and salvaged everything they could from the bear. They used its skin and fur to craft clothing or insulator material for their settlements, whilst using the animal's bones for tool production. More than likely, the bear's meat was also consumed by the tribe. Later interactions between early humans and Arctodus show that these people were charring the remains of these animals, likely to sustain themselves from the immense amounts of meat that could be extracted from a carcass. As humans made their way further into North America, they would have been forced into further interactions with these giant bears. The bears would soon find themselves in direct competition with Homo sapiens for carrion, primarily from the huge carcasses of mammoths and mastodons, relied upon by both species for sustenance. Not all of these interactions would have ended well for either species. By the time humans arrived in the Americas, they had armed themselves with efficient stone points and spears. But bringing down one of these immense ursids would not have been an easy task, even for an experienced hunting party. Huge, powerful arms tipped with sharp claws would make short work of any hunter who dared to get too close. Safety in numbers would have provided these tribes a better chance of defending themselves. But this was still a massive, dangerous animal that would not hesitate to fight back if its space or resources were threatened. It has even been proposed that animals such as Arctodus might have actively stopped humans from migrating into the Americas earlier than they did. Arctodus was an established resident of the American side of Beringia and would have been one of the largest, most dangerous animals in the world at the time humans were starting to cross the land bridge. The cave bears and brown bears of Eurasia would have been difficult enough to deal with, but now they were entering a land full of brown bears and colossal short-faced bears that could stand almost 4 meters tall when rearing up to strike. It is a theory that stands on shaky ground and has not been formally accepted, but it is still considered by some. Arctodus fossils are actually relatively commonplace across North America and span almost the entire continent. It is easy to picture Ice Age animals such as Arctodus living specifically in icy tundra regions to the north. But this was an animal that was just as home on the Great Plains as it was in the northern stretches of Canada. Amidst the habitats favored by this giant bear were dense pine forests, tundra, caves, open grasslands, mountainous regions, open woodland, wetlands, plateaus, and coastlines. As the animal's diet was massively adaptable, it could afford to live in many different kinds of environments, and it certainly made the most of the wilds of North America throughout the Pleistocene. Bears living in different areas would have encountered a vast range of different wildlife. Those living on the Great Plains would have encountered huge herds of bison and wild horses, as well as camelids and the famous mastodons. Saber-toothed cats would compete with them for carrion, and prior to the arrival of humans, the giant terror bird Titanus would have too. Woodlands would have seen Arctodus interacting with brown bears, mountain lions, dire wolves, and various species of ground sloth, while mountainous tundra regions were home to reindeer, muskox, and bighorn sheep, with eagles flying overhead. Arctodus is known to have inhabited a huge range, reaching as far north as the north tip of Alaska and as far south as southern Mexico. Most fossils are found in what is today the United States of America, with fossils typically becoming more densely found the further west you travel. The La Brea tar pits in California are a key site, where the bears would have lived alongside all the key American megafauna seen by our early ancestors in the Pleistocene. But the central states, as well as Florida, specifically for Arctodus pristinus, are particularly fossil-rich areas. Canada, for the most part, is relatively lacking in Arctodus fossils, but we know the bears were there, even if they were simply stopping by on their way to and from Beringia. As we mentioned at the start of this video, bears have been a particularly diverse group of mammals across their natural history. While Arctodus is perhaps the most famous of the ancient bear species, alongside Europe's Ursus spelaeus, the cave bear, it may not have been the very largest. As it stands today, the title of the largest bear ever to evolve is a very close tie that has not quite been awarded confidently. Arctodus simus currently stands in competition with Arctotherium angustidens, a potentially even larger animal to live across central Argentina at the same time Arctodus was roaming the north. This giant comes very close to matching Arctodus simus in size, and paleontologists have placed it measuring anywhere between 3.5 to 4.3 meters when stood on its hind legs. Whichever of these bears was the larger of the two would be the biggest carnivorous land mammal in all of Earth's history. Another close relative of Arctodus to live in the same place and time as Simus and Pristinus was Tremarctos floridinus, an animal that was even more closely related to the modern spectacled bear. At around 2 meters long, this was another primarily herbivorous member of the family that would have lived generally much more southerly than Arctodus, favoring the humid regions surrounding the Mississippi River as well as northern Mexico. Outside of the Americas, bears were conquering the world throughout the course of the late Cenozoic. Huracan, for example, was a hypercarnivore, one of the largest and most dangerous bears to ever live. Found in the forests of Eastern Asia in the Middle Pleistocene, You might be surprised to learn that Huracan's closest living relative is the peaceful giant panda. Another early relative of the panda was the diminutive Ailuropoda microta, no more than 1 meter in length. First evolving in the late Pliocene, this bear became extinct long before Arctodus appeared on the scene, and would have lived a life much more similar to its living relative than the monstrous Huracan. Some of the bear's earliest ancestors hardly resembled Arctodus at all. Ursivis almensis is the first animal that can be taxonomically linked to the bears through the family Ursidae, but you would be forgiven for mistaking the animal as a relative of raccoons or wolverines. At a little over 1 meter in length, Ursivis lived in the Miocene epoch of North America, Europe, and Asia, around 23 million years ago. It likely lived in the forests and had a thick fur coat for keeping it warm throughout the winter months. Unlike modern bears, it had a long, almost dog-like snout and a long tail, an ancestral trait that would be all but lost in modern bears as they began to grow larger. A later but still very early relative of the bears was Beluga, an even smaller genus that lived in the woodlands of Eurasia around 19 million years ago. Beluga begins to more closely resemble what we would consider as a bear today, with a broader snout and shorter tail. Only it grew to a total length of about 80 centimeters. We are so close, yet still so far from the ancient megafauna of the Pleistocene. It is believed that Arctodus eventually became extinct due to a mix of circumstances, which included competition with other animals, the disappearance of its habitat due to climate change at the end of the last ice age, and possibly low genetic diversity in the Arctodus gene pool. To those with a fascination in prehistoric animals, it is almost heartbreaking that our ancestors lived alongside these magnificent animals up until a mere 12,000 years ago, but they're no longer around today. Turning to the last living relative of the short-faced bear, the majestic Andean bear, we can see just how amazing these animals would have been in life.